So Benjamin, I'm super happy to see you. It looks like you are on Mount Everest, or you just came back from the highest trek on Mount Everest. Where are you?
Yeah, I wish I could claim that glory, but not quite Everest. But yeah, I'm in on the edge of the mountains in South Korea. So I've been trekking. Yeah, I try and trek most days.
Wow. Okay, so Benjamin, you're a futurist. I have a couple of questions for you, of course, about the future. But before, can you tell us a little bit about your context? Who are you? What is your story?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I was born in the UK, educated in London, but had a career in finance that took me to New York and the Far East. And then I guess over time I started to look at the world more and more holistically. It, in my financial career, I often looked at, I guess, mega trends and the I guess I would always be working at the intersection of multiple disciplines within finance. And then when I left finance, I ended up investing in Silicon Valley, doing some sitting on the boards of some startups and entrepreneurial endeavors. I set up an institute at a design school with the help of a friend, sort of focused on collective intelligence. And then one day I kind of woke up and decided I was going to put all my experiences together and help people navigate the future, which for me is a certain element of forecasting, trends, scenario analysis, and also psychologically preparing people for uncertainty.
And excellent. What do you think is the most needed thing to understand the future today? What are we missing?
Do you mean as in an approach to the future, or do you mean as in as in forecasting the future?
Oh, both. I mean both.
Both. Okay. Well, I guess the sort of psychological approach, there's a little bit of a paradox. I think that one has to be comfortable with not knowing. And it's rather apt that the mountains I've just been climbing are in South Korea. And actually the whole area is littered with Zen temples, and the sort of core philosophy of Zen is actually maintaining a don't know mind, a mind of not knowing, and it's through holding that mind of not knowing that quite often insight arises. So what that means, I guess, in everyday parlance is we're always obsessed with intellectual understanding, always obsessed with facts and figures. Sometimes we have to tap into our greater intelligence. And what I mean by that is it's not some sort of voodoo stuff, new agey or anything, but we Carl Jung referred to it in himself. That there's different ways of knowing. So there's the intellectual thinking way of knowing, and there's sensing, there's intuition, there's various ways of understanding, and great scientists, philosophers, futurists, even investors know this, and I think it's an important sense to cultivate. Even geopolitical strategists are talking about it nowadays. A guy that works for Henry Kissinger as a geopolitical strategist just put out a book called The Seventh Sense, I think it was called. A guy called Ramos. So design schools understand this. I think design schools are doing some very good work on this kind of front. So that's part of the approach. I guess to finish off in approaching the future, if you don't have a lot of experience forecasting, then obviously you can hire people like me, but you can also spend time doing scenario analysis, and I think that's also very useful. And sit down with a group of your top employees around a table and kick back. Don't try and get out of that really intellectual place and just bounce scenarios back and forth in a very relaxed environment. Write them down and discuss them and see what would happen to your business if these scenarios happened. Last year, people, we spent a lot of time forecasting what was going to happen with the British referendum in the EU and the presidential election. And we happened to get both right, but you don't have to be a futurist to be sort of future-proofing your business to a certain extent. Just because the newspapers tell you that it's impossible for Trump to win, really, one should have sat down and thought, okay, if he wins, will this have a major impact on my business, and do I need to prepare for that? So if he does win, what's he saying? Because if you looked at the stock market, the night of the election, it was, first of all, the stock market fell rather precipitously. Then investors caught themselves because there hadn't been many investors hadn't been looking at what Trump had been saying on the economic front. They were just listening to all these scandals and noise. It was a real. I guess the battle between Clinton and Trump was, a lot of it was not necessarily policy per se. It was a lot of character assassination back and forth. And so investors are paid to get things right. And so, but unfortunately, during the summer when Trump announced his economic plans, it was eclipsed by the latest Trump scandal, Twitter, whatever it was. And so the night of the election, investors were like, "Oh, what did Trump say on the economic front?" I mean, this is a massive oversimplification, but this is kind of my sense. And they realized actually that he had some very sensible pro-growth policies, and so the market actually went up. That's my take. So, if you're a business owner, you should have been thinking about what Trump would mean to your business. So that's hopefully answers or begins to answer. It's a very, very we could talk about this for hours and hours, but that kind of addresses the approach to the future.
Very, very interesting. The first part is quite outlier because it reminds me, to basically sit and not knowing and accept that you don't know and trying to find insights or intuition or whatever you call it. I may call it void or emptiness. It reminds me like when I talk to some CEOs and they ask me to help them for their strategy or they want to talk and deal with radical innovation, and I tell them, okay, let's take 1 week and go and walk in the forest and then you can start to really think and feel. And they are like, 1 week? Are you crazy or what? I don't have time for that. And people are like trapped. Even when they talk about the future, they are not only trapped in their mental thinking, but in a very short-term mental thinking. So I really love that, and also the second part. I guess we should work on scenarios and and with people around me. That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned Trump's election and Brexit, and I remember we were talking. Well, you're not always in Korea, in South Korea. Last time we talked, or one of the last time we talked, you were in the US, and that was just before the election. And I remember that you quite predicted very well the Trump election. So now it's easy for me to ask you, when I'll talk to you in 1 year, what will have happened that could be surprising to many, but that could be actually quite clearly forecast already today. So when we sit together in 1 year and we look back, what will have happened?
Okay, here we go. So I guess the problem with so 2016 there were a number of major events on the calendar, like the British referendum and the presidential election. So there's presumably a kind of a binary result, yes or no, in terms of Brexit and in terms of Trump. Ultimately, Clinton versus Trump. Of course, there were some outliers that we did do some scenario analysis around, including constitutional crises and various other events which didn't transpire. 2017. So we have some things on the calendar. We have major elections in Europe. We have France, obviously, Netherlands, and Germany. I think in 12 months' time, I think we would probably have had a few more shocks to the European Union, and we might be more seriously talking about the disintegration of the EU, breaking down into possibly smaller groups. In the United States, probably in 12 months' time, the economy would have started to turn south. I think Trump has introduced some useful ideas into the policy debate. The fact that I'm ignoring all this stuff. I know my friends progressive friends in California are absolutely horrified by Trump's policies on diversity, his lack of political correctness, his policies towards the environment, immigration. That they're horrified. But if one just focuses on economics, he's got some sensible pro-growth policies. Deregulation. I think the US and many countries are blighted by government interfering too much in our lives and too much in business. So he's doing some sensible things. We could talk a lot about them. I think he's inherited an economy in its 8th year, almost, in the business cycle, and economies don't just keep going up and up and up. So I think it's going to be a struggle for him to avoid an economic a recession in his first term. And the problem is, along with economic problems, I would guess that the social issues would have intensified. You just have to look at the last week. He introduces an immigration policy which is supported by, according to Rasmussen polls, supported by 2/3 of the Americans. But again, many people on the coastal areas of America, New York and California, are absolutely horrified that he's halting immigration from seven countries. And within 24 hours, they've mobilized large groups of people at airports, etc., etc. So I'm guessing that some of his other policies will result in a lot more social discord. When we were writing about social discord in the United States 2 or 3 years ago, I think people thought we were a little bit nuts, because it was kind of still blue sky, and there wasn't even didn't look like there were many clouds there, unless you were looking at the data that we were looking at. And I was I wasn't worried. It was obviously, it would be great for our predictions to have been wrong, but on this case. But I was thinking, am I going to get this completely wrong? But looking at the data, the income disparities, listening to the dialogues between what people were talking about in California versus what they call the red states, looking at the echo chambers in social media and seeing how divided people were, just looking at a lot of different factors, and obviously analysing what was going on in Washington DC. We were very concerned about social discord and civil. We were very early on saying that looking at history, looking at other countries' histories, it wouldn't be a surprise to have some form of civil war or constitutional crisis. So now, if you look at the blogosphere, the word civil war and social discord is all over the place. I would guess it would intensify in the next 12 months.
Wow, that's not super optimistic. So maybe if we look further, that will be more shiny and maybe a more personal question. How do you see yourself in 10 years? Where will you live? How is going to be your life in 10 years?
I'm much more positive on a 10-year view. I think that just look at the human journey, and I guess it's a good point to mix the two. The planetary journey and the human journey are maybe not too dissimilar. In life we go through challenges, suffering, and we learn from that suffering, hopefully, and we grow. And so at the moment that there's a lot of imbalances in the planet, a lot of stresses, but our species needs to evolve to the next level. Our societies are still kind of based on the industrial revolution mindset, and we need institutions that can deal with the new world that we've entered, probably in the last 10, 15 years. So me personally, I like traveling. I like being in between the East and the West. I think there's a lot to learn both ways, and I like this concept of co-creation. So I think I have great respect for ancient philosophies and creativity, and I think that can be used in the West a lot more. Quite frankly, I'm not sure where I'll be living. I guess I'll probably still be shuttling back and forth. I'm married to a Korean, and my daughter's half English, half Korean. So that's obviously going to be a factor. I've considered living in the US or making my main base London, and I'm still optimistic about the motherland, even if pull the trigger on Article 50 and we do leave the EU, because I'm not sure the EU will exist in 10 years time. But what I do know is that the youth. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that regardless of Brexit, the youth of Europe want want to be connected. They want to be able to travel back and forth. I'd be surprised, maybe the EU won't exist in its current form, but I'd be very surprised if the borders are totally closed in 10 years' time. I think by then we would have figured things out.
I hope so. If you ask me, I hope so.
So I think we will. I mean, there's bigger things going on than just that. I think the advances we're seeing in technology, but more so in the way of thinking, are very encouraging. But by my forecast, December 2015, we did a 10-year forecast. We said by 2025 would easily be coming out of a challenging period. Hopefully earlier, but we should be in quite positive times by then.
I have a last question. What advice would you give to your daughter so she can thrive in this first challenging world, and then new world, whatever happens? What would be the top 3 or 5 advice you will or you are already giving her?
Maybe the first would be don't listen to me. No, don't. Not so much don't listen to me, but don't really think for yourself and trust your own intuition. Hopefully she won't lose her intuition. At the moment she's 2 years old, and her children, as you know, have strong intuition, but then they come across what's called the education system, and we try and drill ideas into their heads. And then when you get to my age, you spend a lot of the time trying to get rid of the ideas that were put into our heads when we were younger. I've obviously made a career of that as a futurist. So that would be one thing. I would say that study's obviously important, but again, it's not all about intellectual study. I think one should have fun through the education process. I think that doing things beyond the intellectual, again, whether it's music, dance, all this, I think is really important. And I think sciences are really important. But again, some futurists suggest that in this new sort of age of robots with robots and mechanization, that actually the creative side and the humanities become very important again. So I think there was a phase where in different countries go through different cycles, but you look back at Russia in the USSR days, and they were all hell-bent on being scientists. If you look back at the US and UK particularly, 80s, 90s, everyone was hell-bent on being investment bankers, and we go through these cycles. I think it's a very important time to be a holistic thinker. I used to look back at Leonardo da Vinci and think, oh my God, how did this man become an expert in so many separate disciplines? How do you have enough time? And what I realized later in life was that because he touched on so many so-called disciplines, he was able to be so good in so many of them because they are all interconnected, and that's what I've gained, I guess, in my career. I had a call yesterday with the author of the book, The Neo-Generalist, and he was Kenneth Michelson. He was very much in agreement with these ideas.
Wow,
so yeah, and I guess lastly, it goes back to what you asked me at the very, very beginning. I think we rush into answers, and I think maybe we should afford ourselves the time to hold the questions longer.
Very interesting.
I think indigenous cultures knew this, and in this kind of crazy age that we're in with information overload, it's very easy to throw oneself into answers and solutions. Sometimes, what is it? Someone said the solutions are the problem, or something like that.
Wow, Benjamin, super interesting. Thank you so much for all your ideas and insights. I think now it's time for me to let you go back to your mountains and maybe meet some monks on the way. That sounds super exciting. And I look forward to seeing you again super soon.
Great. Thank you very much for your time, Bruno.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Keep well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.